Hi. Uh, in 2019, as some of you already know, I embarked on a project called The Island. I applied and was accepted to do a 10-week residency at Werkraum Wartck in Basel. So my previous visit to Wartck involved me exploring this idea of being on an island, being in isolation. I was going somewhere where I didn't know anybody, and that can feel a little bit uncomfortable at times. And so I sort of put myself on this sort of imaginary deserted island. Of course, I was going to Switzerland, which isn't deserted, but I decided to use the concept of, if I was on an island, then I could only use things that I could find or imagery that I could find to be creative with. And sometimes being challenged by this is all I have, what can I do with it? Something that I've sort of adopted as something that I quite enjoy doing now. So I was given a studio called the Guest Atelier, and I was going to be working there for almost 3 months. I'd initially gone with ideas, looking at the idea of islands and isolation, reading Robinson Crusoe and one of my favourite paintings by Arnold Berkelin, The Island of the Dead. Happened to live in Basel, so there seemed to be a very interesting connection there. And also started on this painting, which is still not completed, but now I've got new ideas of where I might take it. It's a little island off the coast of Croatia that I just thought looked like a perfect little desert island. I even think it had something on there that made me think that maybe somebody lives on it. Anyway, this whole idea of being stuck on an island and how life might work and how it might affect you was something that I wanted to investigate. Here you can see in the top part here is a little map of Switzerland, which makes it look like an island, and me coming from Cape Town's also like an island, so there was lots of sort of comparative things that I could draw on, and as you can see, I'm also looking a bit like Robinson Crusoe on the front of the book, with the hat that was kindly given to me by Janine. So my first sort of endeavours into what to do on this island. The first thing I found to sort of found objects that I could make things with were these paper bags from the supermarket. And so I started playing around based on the photograph on the right, which I sort of researched before and taken with me. I decided that I was going to create this paper bag head and do something with it. And so it turns into this sort of paper mask. And because there's lots of sort of performative things happening in the building at the Wartck, I sort of got interested in what happens when you have to perform something. And just watching the puppet maker in the studio next to me and how she brings to life these sort of inanimate objects, I was quite fascinated with what was happening. So, once you've made a paper bag with a face on it, you have to try it on. And so here's a photo of me wearing the paper bag. But what I found was that as soon as I've got this thing on and I start photographing myself, I don't recognize it as me, which sort of gives you a strange sort of freedom to go down routes that you might not do without a paper bag. And so the first thing I did with these paper bags is I made a performance. The one on the left, which I'll play first, it's going to play both of them. The one on the left is me doing this repetitive jumping motion in this paper bag, which I quite liked. And then the one on the right is the second costume that I made, where I got somebody else to perform in it, just because the practicalities of videoing yourself while you're wearing all this strange gear is pretty difficult at times. Having made a project about being in isolation, coming back and COVID struck, and so we're all in isolation, which felt really sort of strangely poignant at the time. And so being in lockdown and looking for ways to be creative, one of the things I started doing, first residency, I'd been to lots of contemporary dance performance, and I sort of got interested in contemporary dance, and because I was doing performative things, movement became an important thing that I was looking at. And so what I started to do was I started to take short videos from YouTube of contemporary dance, and there's one woman called Sharon Ayal, an Israeli woman who works out of Berlin, who just makes people move in the most extraordinary ways, and I really like what she does. And so I took a piece of her video, which I'll play to you now, and then I took the music away and just used the movement to create new music. And so this was a starting point. I ended up making around 30 or 40 minutes of music in short 1 to sometimes 3 minute pieces. And I was really quite sort of excited by this, but I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. And so I decided that, okay, if I get the chance to go back, then I wanted to use this as one of the starting points and maybe work further in creating sort of performative costumery and working with my music to go with it. So that's what we did. So this is me arriving back for my second residency at Wartck. Nice autumn weather, mild, beautiful autumn trees everywhere. And I instantly got COVID, ironically, having not been sick for 3 years. I arrived and I get COVID. So I spent the first week of my residency stuck in this studio, and I did go out, but only just to walk along the river, just to get some fresh air. And then when I went back to the studio, I had a few paints that I'd taken with me, and I just started making small paintings before I got going on other things. And these are just some of the little paintings that I made in that first week. I also started playing around, just because there was lots of brown paper everywhere, making paper mache, and so I started modeling these slightly sculptural things. And I think because I'd been doing ceramics before I left, I'd sort of got interested in working three-dimensionally. So I started making these sort of paper mache strange figures, which I then painted. um, which I sort of quite liked, and it's something that I might revisit somewhere down the line, but it was just interesting to play around with a new technique. But what I really wanted to do was I wanted to take the idea that I'd been working with in the ceramics of almost disguising something with pattern to disguise the form of things. So you can see one of my big ceramics on the left, and the sort of first painting I made while I was there. And this was made out of a roll of bookbinding fabric that somebody gave me to cover the tabletops within the studio, just to protect them. But it was such a nice colour that I thought, oh no, I can use that. And so a combination of that, and during the week that I was sick, on the Thursday, once a month on a Thursday, it's cardboard day, where everybody can put in the city can put their cardboard outside and it gets taken away. And so all the streets were lined with all this sort of fresh, clean cardboard. So I collected a whole pile of it, and I thought, okay, I'm going to use some of this to work with, because I'd also taken another little image which was a bit of an influence. And so you can see the pots now start to relate into these flat two-dimensional shapes. And I'd seen this performative sort of figure made out of cardboard, so that sort of triggered my ideas off. And so I started to make a variety of different shapes with this bookbinding fabric and this found cardboard in the street based on the ceramics, and started constructing it into this sort of three-dimensional sort of sculptural costume, and playing around with how it might move. Here you can see me on the left, sort of embedded into the things that I've been making. And eventually we made this performative costume, or I made this performative costume, and I wore it myself and sort of practiced how this thing might move. And I could see that there was there's a strange mixture of influence in there, everything from the Bauhaus and the Triadic ballet right through to Cubism and Japanese culture, and obviously with the colours, African culture. Now the colours that I used came about because I thought, well, if I was on an island, then I'd probably only be able to use natural materials, and so I decided to use these natural earthy materials, particularly because I'd been working with clay and clay that I'd found off the mountain. I quite like the idea of going slightly more earthy, even though I'm drawn to bright colour. And then I found this photo of this samurai warrior, which is in the bottom right here, and it was interesting to see the comparisons in how it looks. It's like a suit of armour almost. Anyway, from the costume we created, I had a professional dancer who came from Berlin that was funded, and we got him to move in the costume. And so I had a great day working with Marco Volta. We ate lots of cake along the way, and we made a whole series of performances, him working with some of my ideas and then him feeding into some of the ideas that I had, and we created this video between us. The wonderful thing about working with other professional people is that they obviously bring their own skill set into the whole game, and it was fantastic that that he could balance on one leg, which I couldn't do. I fell over a few times trying, and so that was really good that he brought a different sort of life to the costume, and we did lots of takes of different options and a few different I do a few different ways of getting him to move within the costume. This one being a very sort of repetitive, a little bit like the jumping bag in the first season that I did at the Wartck. I wanted him to do these repetitive movements over and over again. This also led on to a third video which we filmed via a green screen, which we call Dance of the Forest. Anyway, one of the satisfying things for me during this whole process was working with my own music, which was great. I mean, that was one of the best parts about it, that I can now bring a new element into what I've been doing. We had a lovely sort of snowy period in the December of January where the city, Basel, doesn't actually get very much snow generally, and so it was nice to actually sort of be in the city when it did get snow, and was a great for sort of photo opportunities. So I went out on the few days that we did have snow and took lots of photos, and photos have always been one of my big things that I do when I go traveling. I like using photography as a medium. And these are just a few of the photographs that I took out and about in the cold weather, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Some of these later became paintings. One of the other great things about being in Switzerland is the accessibility to fantastic exhibitions, and I saw lots of very interesting things in museums and galleries, and this was in the museum in Zurich, a beautiful big new museum that they've built as part of their national collection, and this is a Nicky Sanderfall exhibition, which was, I mean, really quite inspiring in the quirkiness and the variety of mediums and things that she worked with, which I found quite inspiring, because sometimes, because I do work in a huge variety of different types of media, that sometimes I feel, you know, am I just unfocused? But then when I see somebody like this who really just sort of went for it, sort of makes me think, no, you know, I must just carry on doing what I'm doing. These were in the Museum of Ethnology in Neuchâtel, another fantastic museum with lots of inspiration to draw from. And I sort of became interested in how we take living culture and turn it into museum artifacts, sort of robbing it of its life in some respects. Even though it's interesting for us to go and see these things, I sort of believe that they should have a life of their own in some respects, and they should move and be part of a living culture. And in some respects, that's what I sort of wanted to do a little bit with what I was making. Other exhibitions, fantastic ceramics. Just saw so many nice, interesting things happening with contemporary ceramics. Another beautiful wall piece, all made from ceramic, which sort of talked colour-wise to what I was doing too. But I just liked the way that this all worked together, and I've sort of become, in working with found objects, I've suddenly become much more interested in materiality and artists who are just sort of using found materials and recycling things into interesting possibilities. And these are two pieces that were in a museum. One of them is made from wooden barriers that they use in the street to sort of keep people out of building sites. And this artist created this fantastic wall piece. And the second one is an artist who uses paper to make it look like fabric, and creates these amazing wall installations out of this almost like tissue paper.
Is this
I put this one in for Lorraine Lewin because I just knew she'd love this. Another beautiful big piece, just on one big white piece of paper, so free and loose and lovely. And just seeing other people making things out of cardboard boxes. Here, this is an artist who just used little cartons out of other packaging and made these interesting constructions which were then painted. Again, something very Swiss, these little sort of chalet houses that sat on walls, and I mean the attention to detail was really quite interesting, and I just love them. Again, some a little bit more wild ceramic, but I just like the combination of the little hints of glaze over a carved figure in the clay. And I'd say of all the exhibitions, this was my favourite because it talked to what I was doing in some respects. And this artist, she created this piece that was in the Tinguely Museum, and the director gave me a tour of the museum so that I could get to see this piece. And It's really fantastic. She took 9,000 clips of people dancing from the internet and YouTube and TikTok and all sorts of things, and then compile them into this huge video installation, this multi-screen video installation, where she was taking one piece of music. It's actually 4 hours long, and it's been edited in such a way that all the video relates to that piece of music at that one point, and you could literally spend hours looking at this and never get bored. It was such a joyous thing, and it made me realize, you know, how important dance and movement is to culture and is to people in general. And I'll just play you these two little clips because they're great. Anyway, that was a real highlight, and these are two images again, just looking at taking sort of living culture, whether it be wildlife in these sort of dioramas, or these costumes from sort of island culture, and putting them as static objects in museums. And so I decided that I wanted to display the costumery that I've been making up on the wall, like it was in a sort of museum. And so this living moving thing suddenly becomes this sculptural static object, which I quite like. They look really good when they were high up like that. And so all these objects started to accumulate, the sort of what looked like sea urchins, which ended up on my head, eventually turned into a second costume, and I'd organised myself to work with a singer from the Opera Basel, or the Theatre Basel, and I had her just for about 3 hours. And so I devised this costume, first wearing it myself to see how it might work, and eventually Jasmine came, and we took this apart, and we made her wear some of it, and she created this video again using the music I wrote, and working with her voice and how we might work with it over the music. given more time, I would have really liked to sort of develop that much further. And obviously there was limitations in how we recorded it. Everything was done on cell phones, so the sound isn't probably of the highest quality, but it's given me ideas for how something like that might develop. I'll just throw in some of the other things that I'd also played around with, working with cardboard, obviously developed into these little sort of geometric abstracts. And I also made some paintings around the same sort of theme too. Some of the photography I did in the sort of museum dioramas also took on some of the forms and the shapes that I'd been using in the thing, and I made collages, digital collages of these objects which I always thought of as of the animals on my island. Now, in the first part of my journey in 2019, my first thing I made was this costume out of a paper bag, and I found this roll of brown paper that somebody had left outside their door, which is something that people do. They just, if they don't want something, they just put gratis on it and they put it outside their studio, and if somebody wants it, then you're welcome to take it. And so I took this roll of brown paper, thinking initially I might just use it to cover my tables, because every day I like to sort of clean off my table and put fresh brown paper down, and so I'd start the day with a fresh new table. But it was slightly thicker than the normal paper, and I thought, oh, I wonder whether I can make a paper bag out of this. And so it was difficult, but I constructed this paper, the sculptural form of this paper bag, which is exactly the proportions and the dimensions of the first paper bags that I was using, which come from a very specific supermarket. And so I made this big bag, and everybody just loved it. Everybody just thought, wow, this is so good. But everybody wanted to know what was in the bag, or what was I going to put in. It's almost like you have a bag, you have to put something in it. And so I thought about it, and I decided that I wanted it to be a bag of acceptance. So in my final sort of vernissage sort of exhibition at the end of the thing, I asked people to write on a piece of paper things that they've accepted in their life. Like, I sort of, as a teenager, I always thought that maybe I might play at Wimbledon, or I'd be a good enough tennis player to do that. But at some point in your life, you realise it's not going to happen, but you're okay with it. You sort of accept it. And so I wrote on my piece of paper, I accept that I'll never play or win the Wimbledon tournament, and I threw it in the bag. And I invited other people to do the same by throwing what they accepted in their life. And at the end of my residency, I got to fish all these things out and read what people accept in their life, which was actually very interesting. And some were trivial, and some were poignant, and some were very deep and quite sad. So it was quite a good thing to do. Anyway, any supermarket shopping bag goes on a journey. So we decided to take it on a journey through the city. So we couldn't get it down the stairs because of its sort of just awkwardness in the size of it, but we managed just to get it in the lift. And so we took it on a journey, and here it is outside the building. Gives you a bit of the idea of the scale of it. And we carried it around the city and deposited it in different places, and we had such a fantastic response to it. I'm not normally somebody who likes being in the public eye in some respects, but it was such a fun experience, and people really wanted to sort of engage with it and have their photographs taken with it. And we placed it in all these different places, and this one woman who had her little dog that was exactly the same colour, and she spent about 25 minutes just photographing her dog in front of this giant paper bag. And people came up and asked, what does it mean? And that they really liked it, and so we had a bit of fun with that. And I said, we've just got a new job and we're going shopping. Which brought a few smiles to faces. And so we took lots of photographs throughout the day, and eventually it ends up back in front of the building, and back in the studio where it now remains until September. In September they're going to show it again as a part of the sort of 30-year celebration of the Wartck building, and somebody will either perform in the bag like I'm doing here, or it will just be on show, and people can throw in their acceptance. I felt I had to move in as I'd done that with the first one. Just in the last weeks of my residency, I also worked with a whole group of students who came into the studio, and their challenge was to make something in response to what I'd made. They also had to, like me, engage with the people in the house and the building, and so they decided to try and create something that was sort of influenced by what I did, and sort of contrary to the building. So they wanted to sort of make something that looked like a soft sculpture to sort of soften the building. And this is the work in progress. We had quite a week of discussion and debate over whether this was, because I'm a white man coming from Africa, whether what I was making was appropriating African culture. But I think we came to terms with all the different sources that what I made did come from, and they made these sculptural forms and this huge big painting on this triangular piece of fabric. All the pieces they made were then hung as an exhibition in the space, and they made a performance with it. They also, in sort of collaboration with me, they made a sound piece. So they went around the building recording sounds from the building, like the lifts of the door opening and closing. I do have video footage of the whole performance that they made on the day of my sort of open studios, but I'm still waiting for other people's input so that I can edit that together in a nice sort of way. And here you can just see them rehearsing how it might come together, and how it might work. And we got some really nice photographs in general out of that session. And this is them playing around with trying to make it move. Anyway, here you can see the sculptural forms on the outside of the building, and it gradually moved from the top of the building along this staircase down onto some of the different terraces in the building, eventually ending up here in front of the building as this sort of almost like a shield-like object, and it harmonizes with the building because we decided to use the same sorts of colors, but also in it moving throughout the building, it sort of softens the building. It gives it made the building work in a interesting kind of way as it moves through the spaces. And there's the group of students that I was working with. There's one or two missing there because they didn't want to be in photos. These are just some of the paintings I made from my snowy photographs. That gives you a bit of an insight into what I did while I was away over the last 3 months, and I hope you found that interesting.